here and see what happens. I get this loaded up. Okay. And all right. Hopefully everybody can see this. Can you all see it? To help preserve their farms. That they will disappear, and that's tragic on a lot of levels. But the Hudson Valley is a rich, diverse place that needs active farms. And Sullivan County is a beautiful county, and I think farmland is integral to the beauty of Sullivan County. So, with the support of the Ag Board and the legislature, we're trying to promote concepts for farmers, landowners to preserve their farm through conservation easements, but also municipalities to make them aware of there's things they can do if preserving farmland in their municipality is a goal. It is a partnership. The farms are pretty resilient, and farmers are resilient. They can be innovative and they can do lots of interesting things, but they do need a good, strong partner in the municipality in which their land resides. So I'm just going to give you some examples of things that we've incorporated in our zoning. You may have some in your zoning already. You may not. Some of them we've used quite successfully. Some we haven't used, but they're there as a tool. You should be aware of them. So just quickly, Warwick, 32,000 people, 103 square miles, 3 villages. Farming was and still is our main industry. We're in the southwestern portion of Orange County. We are, I think you are where we were in the 1990s when we were getting a lot of development pressure coming up from Bergen County, Rockland County into Warwick, and there was a concern about rapidly loss of farmland in Warwick. So we took some steps to see if we could not stop that and prevent it. It's not about stopping development, but it's about preserving the portions of your town that are important to your residents, and do a balanced growth approach to how your community develops. Again, the 1990s when it hit us, and in 1999, we really got active in trying to preserve our farms. As I mentioned, it is our largest industry, and there's been countless studies, including by Cornell, that shows that farms receive only 40 cents in taxes returned to them through services for every dollar they pay. So it's for your municipality. It behooves you to try to keep a balance of farms in your community, as opposed to residential development, which ends up costing more than they pay in taxes. So what we did, we went to our voters in 2000 and asked them to bond $9.5 million, which any municipality can do. That's very much more difficult in the day of the 2% tax cap for a municipal board. It's hard for them to go to the voters and ask them to bond such a large number for purchase development rights, which is conservation easements on the land, not the land itself, but the easement preventing development. Ours passed successfully, and we were on the road to preserving farms. 2006, we did a home rule request, which again, any municipality has a right in New York to do, to ask the legislature to allow us to impose a real estate transfer tax for the purpose of preserving farmland in our community. We'll talk about that a little bit later in the context of the Hudson Valley plan, but we were successful in 2006, and by law, you have to go to a referendum to impose it. We did that, and it passed. So it's been very helpful to us. Since we've had those two tools in our municipality, we've preserved 5,000 acres, 44 working farms, at a cost of about $38 million, but we were able to leverage our 17 million into that 38. So again, almost twice as much we got back. So it's a good deal for us. So what do you do? Where do you start? It really comes down to your comprehensive plan. Some comprehensive plans are very good, I've seen in Sullivan, and some maybe need to be tweaked a little. But I'll tell you, if preserving agriculture is important to you, you need to state it very clearly in your comprehensive plan. We have a chapter that's one of the first chapters, and it's right there. It's listed. It's on page 1 of our goals and objectives. And then we talk about different concepts we can use to preserve the farms. And the key here is that if it's in your comprehensive plan, then your zoning has to comply with your comprehensive plan. If you have a comprehensive plan, your zoning must comply with it. That's New York State law. So that's why it's important in your comprehensive plan to really, really state the strength of your goal in preserving farmland. It becomes critical later when you're trying to craft the nuts and bolts of zoning. Incentive zoning really powerful tool in your state, and it's something that you should make sure that your zoning does have. It's authorized under New York Town Law 261B, and it should be in your comprehensive plan. A reference to incentive zoning as a tool for preserving not just farmland, but other active critical areas in your town. It might be water resource protection areas. It might be important ridge lines. Could be things like that. If it's in your comprehensive plan, and then it allows your municipal board to adjust permissible density and area requirements for specific purposes. An example of that would be if you want to preserve more of a parcel and a developer wants to develop a portion of it, you can give them some incentives for doing it in a way that preserves a fair amount of that parcel. And we'll talk about some of that a little bit later on as we go. The incentives are granted by the town board, but they come from a recommendation from the planning board. So the planning board would write to the town board in a memo form, doing an analysis of why this is important. So the town board has the facts and the wherewithal to be able to grant the incentives. Benefit to the town, you get to preserve more of the space, more of the active soils and good farmland. Makes for better developments that are more environmentally friendly. Benefit to a farmer is it allows them to do, through incentives, and we'll talk about the different ones, different things on their land that would allow them to continue to be prosperous, because farmers will survive if they can make a living, right? And what your goal is, if it's to preserve the farms, is to try to give them the tools to do that and make it not terribly difficult for them to do it. So overlay zones, that's the first one. Overlay zones, again, very powerful tool. These are drop-down zones that could be overlaying what's essentially your zoning layout of your town, which is generally where's the residential areas, where's the agricultural areas, what are the acres per dwelling unit, those kind of things. Overlay zones sit on top of them, and they can be pulled down onto a parcel or an area by action of the town board. So one of the ones we have is called an agricultural protection overlay zone, and it laid out over our top of our regular zoning map all of the areas that we had zoned for agriculture and wanted to see agriculture, and there may be other zones in your town that you allow ag in. So for instance, in Warwick, ag as a permitted use is available in every zone we have, whether it's a residential zone or not. That may not be the case in your town, but you may have overlaps on different areas of your town where you do allow ag as a permitted use or even a special permitted use. So the agriculture protection overlay zone is one thing you can do. What are the benefits? Well, it highlights in the criteria for the zone, right, that it's protecting prime soils or statewide significant soils. You don't have a lot of prime soils in Sullivan, but you do have a lot of statewide significant soils, which means it's good for farming. It lays over large parcels, and one of the benefits is that it ensures that if a development occurs in that zone, if that zone is dropped down, that over 60% of it has to remain open, right? And we'll talk about how you achieve that through how a site is developed. Benefits to the farmers, if they chose, if there's, so let's step back a second. The instance is I have a farm in Sullivan, it's 100 acres, and I want the benefits of this, right? So I asked the town board, I petitioned the town board to bring this zone down on my property, right? So the town says, yes, that makes sense, they do it. What's the benefits? So there's some benefits to being in the zone. You get a bonus for transferring development rights. We'll talk about how that's done in a little bit. You might have a farm market of less than a certain size. We chose 4,000 square feet by permit rather than going to the planning board for a full-blown application, which is expensive, can be expensive. You had the right to have, in our case, seasonal agricultural special event permits. So this might be where I'm a farmer, but I don't want to have a full-blown farmer's market, right? I'm not going to be into retail a lot, but I do want to have on-site events. And in our case, we allowed 10 a year. It's an annual renewable permit, so you can see that it's managed well. There's no issues there. And in our case, too, we allowed, and you can do this with any number of lots, but we did one additional lot at half the density of what the underlying zone is. So let's say the underlying zone had a 4-acre requirement per dwelling unit. They could do an additional lot on their land, or 2 acres, right? Gives them a little incentive to want to have this zone on top of their land. The other tool that I think you should really consider, a lot of zoning has it, but maybe hasn't used it much, is cluster or conservation density zoning. This is where the concept of where, so normally conventional subdivision would take a lot, say 100 acres, and it's 5 acre zoning, or it's easy for the math. You would get 20 homes would be able to build on that 100 acres. So now instead of taking 20 lots and building out the whole property, right, you look to cluster those lots on smaller lots. And in our case, we wanted this to work. We adopted this back in 2002, which was a relatively new concept at the time. It's used more so now. But in our case, we wanted developers to do it. And we found that most developers either weren't aware of it, didn't have the ingenuity to want to do it. So we offered them a bonus. In our largest rural zone, right, residential zone, it was 4-acre zoning. We said, if you go to 3 acres, you can go to 3 acres if you agree to cluster it. And at the time we adopted this, the only requirement was that you had to preserve 50% of the site as open space. Developers started to do these, that they were preserving as much as 60 or 70% when done properly. And so we subsequently revised our zoning to step it. We had 6 categories, I think, and if they met 4, they could get the full bonus. If they met less than 4, they didn't get the full bonus. And that's worked out really well for us. I'm going to show you, here's an example, right? So this was our zoning. We have these essentially 4 residential type zones. SL is a suburban low density, which is closer to our developed areas like our villages. Rural residential was the bulk of the town. Mountain and conservation were the higher elevations, where you ran into a lot more steep slopes, so you needed more acres per dwelling unit. But you can see by agreeing to choose the different options, you could get down to, a developer could get down, instead of a 3-acre per dwelling unit, you could go down to a 2-acre per dwelling unit. So that's an incentive. It's a pretty good incentive to the developer. So you say, well, would the town want to do that? Well, you, the town, the municipality, your community, you get a lot of benefit from that, right? You get to preserve a fair amount of the parcel that otherwise would be just somebody's backyard, right? And then you generally put a conservation easement on that 60% open space, either with a land trust or an entity. Maybe sometimes we've allowed the owner to keep that, but it has a conservation easement on it, which is precludes further residential dwelling. So in how we get there, we do what's so-called a 4-step process. You establish the primary and secondary conservation areas. I'll show you an example in a minute. Then you site the houses, right, to avoid these areas. And when it's complete, right, you get a subdivision that, again, instead of houses all over the parcel, all over the beautiful landscape, they're shrunk down to 1 1/4, 1.5 acre lots, which generally for well and septic is about as small as you can get in New York State, I think. And you still preserve 50 to 60% of the site. This is just an example of how a developer would do it, right? This is your parcel areas are primary areas, and that's things like good soils, steep slopes, wetlands, ponds, critical areas that you want to see preserved. Um, and then you broaden those areas by including other secondary conservation things. And those are things like stone walls that are there. Maybe you've got 200 or 300 year old trees that are there that you want to preserve. The active agricultural lands, obviously, you just lay those out, and then you mark out what is the developed area. And that's this dark line. That's where your potential development can occur. And then the developer starts to put in where the house lots are. If he knows he's going from 4 to 3 acre zoning, he's picked up some lots. He puts those in as well. And then you circulate, put your roads in where you're going to go, or they're going to be cul-de-sacs. How are you going to get these streets to flow? And then as the last step, you draw your lot lines, right? So now you see where you've protected all of this, and this all remains open under an easement, and you get a pretty tight development, which is beneficial for a lot of reasons, right? Not only you get the land protected for a municipality, there's less roads to plow, less roads to maintain. And from the town's perspective, it gets 60% of this lot that can continue to be farmed at no cost, right? It doesn't cost the town anything. And now you've preserved some of this. And if you do this consistently throughout your town, you can put these open space parcels in proximity to each other, right? As your planning board looks at these, and you can create quite large swaths of open space to become, wildlife corridors, farmland that could be leased by a farmer that's adjacent to where he's farming now, right? So it makes some sense, and it preserves the really good soils, which is the key if we're going to have a farm economy in the Hudson Valley and Sullivan County in the years ahead. Other zoning tools you can use: transfer development rights. This is where you would set up, again, they're overlays, but you would set up a sending and a receiving zone. So let's say you've got in your town a village, or maybe a hamlet, and that's where traditionally the growth pattern has been. And maybe there's some services there. Maybe there's a small sewer plant, a package plant. Maybe there's some municipal water in the village. And you might want to transfer density from the outer edges of your town where you've got your farms to closer areas where they can be serviced properly. And there's a mechanism for doing it. You would transfer the density rights to the zones in your town. You're not obviously encroaching in your village, but you need a partnership with your villages or your hamlets if you're going to do it. If it's a hamlet, it's within your town, so it's not so much of an issue. But it becomes, again, a consensus of where you want to see development in your community, and where you want to see preservation, right? So you designate these sending and receiving zones, and this is permitted under town law again. And there's examples of where it's worked around. We have it in the town of Warwick, and you create what's called a transfer development bank, where these density credits can be placed in the bank and then moved at a later date if there's not two parcels under similar ownership that want to try to do this on their own. So the municipality can take a role in how this is done. You can partner with a village if you do have a village in your town. We had 3 in Warwick, and we signed an intermunicipal agreement with 2 of them, the village of Warwick and Florida. Intermunicipal agreements are permitted in New York State, and 2 municipal entities can form an agreement to do pretty much anything they want between themselves, as long as they're not infringing on any state laws. So we did have intermunicipal agreement for the transfer of development. And I'll tell you how that works, right? So traditionally, the way villages grew was they annexed land from the town. Well, generally in a town, your density is required for a dwelling unit is higher than it is in a village, right? Generally, village zoning, because of the way villages grew up over the years, they're small lots. So, for instance, in the village of Warwick, they were requirement was a half an acre per house lot in the village, and they have central services, right? The town, our general acreage was 3 acres per dwelling unit. So when a land is annexed from a town into a village, it generally assumes village zoning. And we had that over the 60s, 70s, and 80s in town of Warwick into the village of Warwick, where the developer successfully gets annexed and gets a huge density bonus, right? They go from 3 acre per dwelling unit to a half acre per dwelling unit. So it's 6 times, and that while back then the thinking was, yeah, more residential development, more taxes, everything's going to be great. Well, that reality is more density creates more service requirements and the costs escalate. And so we do know that residential development takes more in taxes than they pay. And that's just the reality of it. And I think most villages are beginning to recognize that or have recognized it. So in our intermunicipal agreement, we said the property, if it's annexed into the village, would come in at town zoning. So it would come in at 3 acre zoning. Now, they're not going to build 3 acre zone houses, lots in the village. But they were able to purchase the additional density. And that purchase of that density for lot, money went into a common fund that the village controlled 60% of where it got spent, and the town controlled the other 40%. But the village wasn't spending it in the village. They didn't have a lot of open space. They were using it in the town in areas that was important to the village, like around a reservoir or a municipal well, or areas that could create issues for the village itself that they wanted to see preserved. So it was a win-win really for both the town and the village. And it's a tool that I think it makes it more efficient, and it removes that automatic density bonus and a dollar bonus to a developer that wants to try to take advantage of municipal services in a village. Agricultural friendly options, adaptive reuse of farm buildings. So, we had a lot of dairy farms in the Hudson Valley in New York, and dairy is a tough business. Some farms have transitioned from dairy. They're maybe raising beef cattle now. Maybe they're just haying. Maybe they're raising goats and chickens. They don't need a big dairy barn anymore. Rather than see that structure just fall apart, I think a municipality comes out ahead if it allows adaptive reuse of farm buildings. And that could be let the farmer put a small engine repair shop in there, or a small woodworking shop in there, or something not terribly high impact, not a lot of truck traffic, but something that allows the farmer to generate some additional income, right? Because that's what we want. We want the farmer business to be diversified enough that they're making a living and want to stay farming, because farming is not an easy business, right? It's generally 7 days a week. And I think it behooves the municipality, if their goal is to preserve farmland, is to try to give the farmer some options. And this is a really, really good one. We have a big area called the Black Dirt in town of Warwick in Orange County, that used to be commodity lettuce and onions and celery. It's still doing onions, but not so much the lettuce and celery anymore. And so they had a lot of big buildings that they weren't using anymore. So we put this provision in, and now you have a lot of small businesses inside these buildings, putting them to good use and generating revenue for the farmer. I also encourage you to put really strong map notes, agricultural map notes on any subdivision that you do, right? Because what happens, somebody, maybe there's a subdivision next to a farm, and somebody moves up from, even Orange County, you're further south, and, the first time the farmer's out there spraying in the field or spreading manure, they're calling up the town supervisor, saying, what the heck is going on here, right? I had those calls. So it behooves you to put it, say, look, it's right in your deed. This is a farm. They don't work 9 to 5. And that gives the municipal leaders a little breathing room, right, to not get beat up. Increased setbacks from farms are always a good idea, especially if they've got manure piles or they've got animals, or roosters are a good one. that gives you a little room. It's always helps to have a pretty good setback requirement from a farm if somebody's going to develop a parcel. And give options for the farmers to diversify. I grew up here in Warwick, and if somebody told me they'd pay you to ride around in a hay wagon through the field, I'd tell them they were nuts. But people do that today. They want to do that. They love to be on the farm. They love to understand. They finally realized that food doesn't come from the supermarket. So give your farmers some opportunities. Maybe it's a B&B in a big farmhouse. Maybe the farmers moved into one of the tenant houses. PDR, which is purchase and development rights. We can talk about that in a little bit. Festivals are a big thing now on farms, weddings on a farm, farm markets. These are options I think you want to try to give to a farm. And you know, it takes a little bit of tweaking sometimes. We've tweaked our regulations several times to make sure that the farm stays compatible with the surrounding area to the best of its ability, right? But this gives the farmer, again, an opportunity to make some money. And try to make it easy. We try to make it a permitted use that requires a building permit for a lot of things. A farm market that's going to be fairly big, in our case, over 4,000 square feet, we send them to the planning board because then you've got more issues with traffic, noise, those things like that. But if it's a smaller scale, the farmer wants to have a farm market on the side of the road, wants to do a limited number of events on the farm. If you can allow that to be permitted through the building department, it really helps the farmer a lot. Because it's expensive, it's time consuming to go through the planning process, and you know, most planning boards are very diligent about trying to do the right thing and make sure that they're following the laws. But for a small, you know, farmer, that can be difficult. This is another tool we included in our zoning, and we did it when a community, and in our case, we were considering what's called upzoning, right? So originally, when we started down this road to preserve our farms, we required, for the most part, 2 acres per dwelling unit. We had an expert come in and do a build out analysis of our town and say, look, if you really wanted to preserve farming, you had to go to 10 or 20 acres per dwelling unit. Well, that just drove everybody crazy, right? Including the farmers, oddly enough, because really their investment is in their land. It's not generally in a 401k, although some are. So when we were contemplating raising the zoning to some number, right? I think the board, it was just before I got on, they left the chore of adopting it all to me. But right before I got on, they were talking about 5 acres, 6 acres. We settled on 4 acres, and then we included the cluster provisions to get down to 3, which made it a little bit more palatable to most people, although there were still some angry farmers. But we also included this. And I say it's useful if your town is considering an upzoning, right? This, again, was a district overlay. Farmer could request to bring it down. It would allow the town to enter an agreement with a farmer to obtain the right of first refusal, either purchase the property, which you wouldn't, municipality is not going to do generally, but perhaps they would purchase development rights when a farm is approached and is proposed to be a non-farm use residential subdivision, right? So this is an agreement between the town and the landowner. Again, it's useful if you're considering an upzoning, and some towns may. So what happens in the density yield? In return for entering the district, the town guarantees that the development density on the parcel stays the same for 10 years, right? So it protects the farmer from that upzoning. And what does the town get? The town gets the opportunity to compete fairly with the developer, because what the developers do is they run up the farm lane, they pull out a wad of $100 bills and wave them around and say, hey, you know, I can get your farm developed in no time, and it's going to be worth the $2 million. Oh, by the way, I'll give you $20,000 down, and when we get approvals, or when we pull the first building permit, we'll start to pay the rest, right? Well, if you've got planning board members on the call, you recognize that sometimes there are things that surface in the planning process that delays approvals of subdivisions, right? You find Indians buried, you find prehistoric dinosaurs, you find buried something that wasn't supposed to be there. And that sends the subdivision and the developer off into a whole different avenue of things to do. And so the farmer is on the hook and sitting there. And we found that with a very fair and active conservation preservation of farmland program in a municipality, you can be very competitive with a developer when you approach a landowner in protecting their farm through either conservation easement or other relationships. So this was a tool that we thought would be helpful. We also, in the agreement, the town would help find grant opportunities, perhaps tweak their zoning again to do some of those things we talked about giving the farmer an opportunity to do some things on the farm by permit. And then again, look for grant money to help the farmer, and that could be grant money maybe to develop or protect their and invest in their structures that they're using on the farm, or technologies that they might need. And that was the town's pledge if we really wanted to see what we could do to help the farmer. And then this is a subject that you're probably going to hear more about. New York State is very up on this. We recognize there's an issue of affordable housing, and that definition can be a whole bunch of different things. But really, the concept is that for young people that might have grown up in your town and they want to live in your town, and maybe they're working at some of the local shops, it's becoming more difficult for them to purchase a house or living space in our valley. And that's because our valley is a great place to live, and it's got a great quality of life, and land prices are not getting cheaper. They're getting more expensive. So in our zoning, we introduced something called it's incentive again for workforce housing in a subdivision of 10 lots or more. We gave as a bonus one additional lot for every 10 market rate lots. So in other words, the developer is not paying a cost for the extra lot he or she is getting. And we're able to do this because these subdivisions are cluster subdivisions, right? So we've got room in the fact that we're doing these on 1.5 acre lots and preserving a fair amount of the property. So if we were going to preserve 60%, we wanted affordable lots in it, maybe that shrinks down to 55%. We're still getting 55% of the land as open space, but we're incorporating the ability to have an affordable unit for every 10. That's not a lot, but it's something. And it's something to be thoughtful about as you look at your zoning and how you might want to try to make some moderate house choices available. So again, how do you qualify for it? You have to make 80% or less of the median income. In this case, was Orange, and yours it would be Sullivan. In 2023 in Orange County, that was $91,000 a year was the median. And so anyone making $72,000 a year could buy a home in Warwick under this scenario in one of these subdivisions. And I'll just do the math for you here. It's the other criteria was you couldn't spend more than 30% of your income, your gross income, on mortgage and taxes. So on a $72,000 income, that's $21,000 and change for a monthly payment of about $1,800. The house cost to the builder, if it was a 1,500 square foot house, we didn't dictate the size of the house. All we said was it couldn't look significantly different than the market rate houses. Could be smaller, and it couldn't be stuck in a corner if it was going to be more than 1 per 10. If you were building 30 units, it had to be spread out through the subdivision. So I just choose $150 a square foot. That's probably close, maybe a little higher. That's the price of the house, $225 for the cost for the builder to build it, right? And he's got no land cost, remember, because it's a free lot. And then if you look at what fixed mortgage would be, and then we did deed restrict the resale, right? So we didn't preclude it being resold by the person who's affordably living there, right? But we did restrict the percentage could be over. It had to keep the percentage by which it was discounted initially, right? So it's a tool. We're building two in Warwick now, and we'll see how it goes. It's done by who gets it? It's done by a lottery run by your town clerk. People submit a application showing their income level. The town clerk holds a lottery, and the lucky winner gets to conclude the deal if they shall choose. Oh, I don't know what we did here, but let me get you back.
Maybe you
Sorry
hit
about
on
that.
it.
Sorry about that, folks. I hit the wrong thing. There we go. All right. And then just
It's real quick, it's not yeah, it's not showing
it's not
still.
showing.
Make
All
sure you're
right, hold on.
still you should still be a host.
You, all right, let me get out of that a
Oh,
minute.
yep, you're a co-host. I think you might have to hit share again.
All right, so hang on, folks. I'm sorry about that glitch. All right, so let's go back because we want to go to from the beginning. All right, so stick with me a minute. So as I was saying, you may start to hear of an entity called Hudson Valley Alliance for Conservation and Affordability. I think that's the name of it. I always mess the name up. I am a member of the consortium. So anyway, it's Alliance of Land Trusts and Affordable Home Builders trying to address this issue and say we can preserve and yet build affordable housing at the same time. They're working together. Um, Again to preserve large portions, but also develop where it makes sense, right? There's a project in the planning stages in Red Hook where they're preserving about 100 acres of farmland and then developing 20 acres for, I think it's 40 affordable housing units. Now, to get that kind of density, you do need some central services, and that can be done in a small package plant. It doesn't necessarily have to be a big sewer plant. So if you have a hamlet or you're near a discharge source like a stream, a package plant can be used in this scenario. So those are kind of some of the things that are trying to help ease the affordability issue. You may hear more, but I think you will hear more because the state is going to incentivize communities with grants to do some more of this stuff. Agrivoltaics, Melinda can probably speak to it more, but Cornell's doing a lot of research to see what kind of crops, what kind of livestock can be farmed and grown under solar panels. And I think you're gonna see more of that. So most conservation easements on farms will allow solar, but primarily just to power the farm operations, not for a lot of resale, not the large scale solar that the state seems to be driving us towards. This agrivoltaics is another possibility for the farmer because if there's say they have a 100-acre farm and they've got 20 acres of marginal land, they could put a 5 megawatt array over there on that piece. That's income for them, keeps the farm viable, and doesn't really impact the ability for them to farm and grow food. So this is something that's coming up. Again, these are all typical things that allows a farmer to stay profitable. What are your other opportunities as a municipality to preserve land? Now, we talked about in the beginning Warwick's role in general taxation, adding a few cents to 1,000 or bonding. Those are really difficult things again to do for municipal leaders in the age of the 2% tax cap because generally your state required retirement and health insurance costs eat up a lot of your tax cap in the municipality, and then they've got to figure out how they're going to plow the roads and maybe fund their police and all those kind of things that they have to do. So that's really become difficult for municipalities to do, although you can still do it. The other thing you can do in New York, it's I think one of the greatest powers that local towns have is the home rule right. You can submit home rule legislation to your legislators, your assembly people or senators. They're required to carry it into the legislative session. So For instance, Warwick, when it wanted to consider the real estate transfer tax, we submitted our own home rule request. And we fought for 4 years in Albany to get it through legislative committees and get it to the floor for a vote. And when it got to the floor, it passed overwhelmingly, and Governor Pataki signed it for us. And it's been a home run for us. We've preserved, again, 44 working farms that are still farming today. So that is a path. Any municipality can do it. You can contact your elected officials and let them help steer you through the process. It's a lot of work, and if your municipal board is struggling with a lot of other issues in your town, they may not be up to it. It does take perseverance and stick-to-itiveness. Land trusts can be players in helping you preserve land. Some of them have resources to do it. Big ones like Scenic Hudson, somewhat the Delaware Highland Land Conservancy, although both of those entities have kind of pulled back from the Sullivan County area. So that's one of the reasons Orange County Land Trust is stepped in. Unfortunately, we don't have a big endowment to be able to fund a lot of it, but we're good at putting together relationships that can do that. But then I think the really home run for Sullivan County would be the Hudson Valley Community, and to have Sullivan County included in that. You're going to hear more about this in the months ahead, because we're entering a new legislative session in Albany. Again, this is if you were to do this on your own, you would submit it to your center assembly place, and you'd have to get it through the committees. You'd have to work. You'd have to get it signed, and that's a real chore. As I said, it took us 4 years in a much friendlier environment than I think we're in today. So again, I think it comes down to the Hudson Valley Community Preservation Act. This was a law passed in 2006, and it was passed primarily for Westchester County and Putnam County. And it was amended in 2019 by then Senator Jen Metzger, who is now the Ulster County executive, to include Ulster County. So those are the only 3 counties currently in the Hudson Valley Community Preservation Act. What is it? Well, it allows, after a series of steps, it allows a municipality to go to referendum of its voters and ask them to impose a real estate transfer tax, the purpose of which is to preserve things they identify in a community preservation plan. Okay, and in the focus in our work here in Sullivan with Melinda and the Ag Board, we're focused on preserving farms. You have a lot of beautiful farms in Sullivan County. And if you drive around the county, you can see housing developments kind of sprouting up on the outskirts of these. And if it's in your municipality, you have to be a little concerned with it, because once the land is sold to a developer, it never goes back to farming. And chances are it will be developed, and generally conventionally, unless your zoning is such that they really want to do a cluster subdivision or a conservation subdivision. So the idea here is we want to get Sullivan County. We'd like to see Sullivan County included in this law as one of the counties where a municipality may skip the step of going to Albany, but begin work on a community preservation plan, present it to its residents, and then schedule a referendum where its residents would vote on imposing a tax for, again, the express purposes of preserving what you've outlined in your community preservation plan. Again, why do you do it? It's because it skips the step of your municipal board having to do it. And I think that's important. So Ulster County, when it was included in 2019, they've had 5 towns in the city of Kingston successfully pass referendums and have embarked upon preserving land in those towns and the city. I'm working with Ulster County, town of New Paltz, on a farm that hopefully will close in the next few months. New Paltz was one of the towns in Ulster that had a successful referendum. All right, so again, having the county do this, and I will say, I'll preface this in the beginning, the Sullivan County Legislature did pass a resolution requesting a home rule request from its your representatives, Assembly member Kay and Marr and your Senator Oberacker, to carry this legislation in the 2026 legislative session. So that's why I say you'll hear more about this in the coming months, because it will take support from communities that want the ability to have their voters determine the future of their communities. This is a powerful way for you to do that. So it allows your municipality to then focus with its residents on developing a really good community preservation plan. And there are a lot of examples of what these plans are. It takes the strengths of your comprehensive plan, but it focuses on the objectives of what you'd like to preserve in your town. So again, if your objective is to preserve farmland, it would highlight all of the farm parcels that you'd like to see preserved. It doesn't obligate the landowner to anything or the town to anything, but it simply puts them in the plan, identifies them, and that then makes them eligible for any funds generated by this real estate transfer tax. And then you can focus on an effective campaign to pass a referendum, because again, it does go to the voters. The voters don't like it, they're going to vote it down. If they like it, they think it makes sense to preserving the quality of life in the community of which they've chosen to make their homes and invest their lives, then they'll vote in favor of it. It does take some education. It does take a lot of public sessions with the public to make them understand what it is you're trying to do. But it's worth the fight, I will tell you, and the proof's in the pudding. We'll see that at the end of this thing. And why is it important to have this real estate transfer tax in your community? What does it do? It generates a small amount of funding for your municipality. They don't have to go to a bond where they're taxing you for it. They don't have to put it on the tax bill where they're taxing you for it. They're generating it from the sale of land within your town, and it's paid by the buyer of that land. Okay, so it's someone who's looked at your town and said, geez, that's a really great place where I want to live. Or maybe I want to do a nice development project there. But it's nice because you've been there and invested your time and your energy and your tax dollars in making your community attractive for someone to want to come into. So you're asking someone coming in new to help you with that. Why is it important? Because there's a lot of great, powerful grant programs out there. New York State Ag and Markets has the most powerful one. It pays up to 87.5% or 75% of the value of the development rights on a parcel. So land has three values. It has a market value for the best use, which generally is residential in New York zoning. And then it has a raw land value, which is the underlying raw land value. And the difference is the development right value. That's what you would purchase with a conservation easement. So the landowner retains ownership of the land, farms the land, can sell the land, can give it to its kids, just can't build houses on it because you paid them for the rights they had to build houses on it. And the state will pay up to 87.5% of that cost, plus the cost of closing it, which includes the survey, the title, and the appraisal cost, right? So it's a way for you to take a small amount of money in your municipality and leverage it into a lot of money to help secure some of these farms. Now, you're not going to preserve every farm in your community. A lot of farmers don't want conservation easements. Some do. Some have generational farms that they want to see preserved. This is a great tool to be able to do it. Sullivan County, as I mentioned, did pass the home rule request. It's gone on to the respective representatives. I've listed them there. They will need some support from residents. If Sullivan County residents think this is a great tool for them to help preserve the quality of life in Sullivan, then they need to let their representatives know that. There's no monetary cost to the county to do this, and there's no mandate to the municipalities. If your municipality thinks this is a terrible idea, you just don't go to referendum. You don't do a community preservation plan. If you think it is critical to how your town develops in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, then you're going to support this, and your municipal boards will support it. The municipal boards will be the entities acting to pass the series of laws that need to do. They need to adopt a community preservation plan. They need to impose a law to impose the tax under successful referendum, and they need to pass a law scheduling the referendum, right? So they do have a role, but they will need the support of the municipality residents to be able to move forward. Um, Again, each town has residents prepare the community preservation plan. It has to be done 90 days prior to a referendum, and it has to be viewed by the public, and a public hearing needs to be held for it, and it needs to be adopted by the municipal board. So again, if farmland protection is your number one item, then you highlight those parcels in this community preservation and you explain why that's important. That for the view shape, for the environmental protection of water resources underneath, if you have aquifers that run into your farmland, which generally is what happens. If it's a boost to your economy to have active farms, then you need to state that. If you want to see development occur in portions of your town where you think it makes sense, where you can manage it, you just don't put those parcels in. Warwick, we excluded parcels that were had proposed subdivisions, right? We figured, hey, okay, that's what the owner wants to do. So we didn't put those in our plan. To be eligible for funds from this plan, the parcel has to be listed in the plan, right? So that's why it's important to put this plan together and to include parcels, even if the landowner says, I don't think I'm interested. I've had some come back to us to want to be in it. You can amend it, but only after 3 years that it's been in effect. So crafting the plan is important. And it can be as sophisticated or as simple as you want. In Warwick, we took a map of our town and we went with colored pencils and colored in areas that were valuable for various reasons, and then categorized them in terms of farmland, water resources, trail, open space and trail areas. And New Paltz, they got a grant from the DEC and hired a consultant that actually categorized all of the critical features of their town, and they have a very sophisticated plan. But it doesn't have to be. It just has to reflect what it is you want to protect and preserve in your town. What's the tax? So the tax by the law, the Hudson Valley law, says a municipality can impose a tax up to 2%. Now, most municipalities in the Hudson Valley plan or law have imposed taxes anywhere from 1 to 1.5%. So they've not many of them have gone to 2%. Warwick, we did 0.75%. In Red Hook, they did 2%. In New Paltz, I think it's 1.5 or 1.25%. So that's set by your town board. They determine that, right, with input from the residents. And there's an exemption. The exemption is in this bill is the median sale price of a home in Sullivan County. So that's a pretty good exemption. Let's say, for argument's sake, the median price in Sullivan County at the end of this year is $300,000. The tax doesn't apply to anything under $300,000. So I sell my house for $400,000. The tax only applies to $100,000, right? So does that make sense to everybody? Yeah. So that's where you think about that and what you'd like to generate. I think it's fair, and it does give some relief to the lower income homes that are being sold if there are any left. Again, it's only imposed after a townwide referendum. So the town voters get to decide. And I say, what's more democratic than having your voters vote? They're going to vote yes or they're going to vote no. It makes sense for your community or it doesn't. I think it's a great tool, and it's a great process to make you focus on where your town wants to be 10 or 20 years from now. And I will tell you, 10 or 20 years sounds like a long time, but when development starts to occur, that can go in the blink of an eye. And what developers will do is they'll secure, either through an option or outright purchase, parcel of land. They might sit on it for 5 years. They don't really care, right? Taxes are low. There's no development on it. So they'll sit on it. Once they buy it or get an option on it, it's done, right? You're never seeing it farmed again. You're never seeing it open again. It's whatever they're going to do with it. And generally that's build residential housing. These are the towns where they've successfully passed a community preservation fund. 5 towns on Long Island were the first. We followed them. We got the idea from them. Red Hook came next, and then Chatham. which is up in Columbia County. And then when Ulster got in the Hudson Valley bill, these towns and the city of Kingston all joined. Oddly enough, Westchester and Putnam County have no towns that opted into this. So bizarre as it is, that's the way it is. There are several in those communities now attempting to do referendums. So what should be your future goals? Look at your zoning code. It's a document that does need to be revisited very regularly. I will tell you, as a municipal person for 22 years, that's a painful process sometimes because people just don't like that. But it's really important for you to do it. And we relied a lot on our planning board. So if there are planning board members here, we relied a lot on them for things they found in the planning process that were glitches or didn't make sense. And we were able to make changes in the zoning to reflect that, to make the process smoother and more beneficial to our community. We need to work at all levels of government to keep farmers farming. Albany sometimes creates wacko laws that can affect a farmer's ability to farm. Farmers are resilient and they're hardworking, and God bless them that they want to keep doing it. But at some point, the roadblocks get so much that they just throw their hands up. So you got to try to keep those roadblocks at a minimum. You really do. And I think it makes sense if I lived in Sullivan County to ask to be part of the Hudson Valley Community Preservation Act. It's a beautiful county. It's got some beautiful farms, but development comes and it comes rapidly. So I would just say persevere. So is it a wise investment to have a community preservation fund to make these changes to your zoning? Yes. I would tell you that in the 22 years I served in Warwick, our farms remain as working farms. They pay the taxes. So when you put a conservation easement on a farm, by the way, generally the farm's paying ag exempt taxes anyway, right? They continue to pay those with a conservation easement. It doesn't prevent them, or it doesn't preclude them from having to pay the tax. So they still pay the tax and they still contribute to the economy. Now, with a conservation easement, again, they can sell the land. We've had several preserve farms turn over and sell to other farms to expand their operation. We've had them sell to new people that want to farm, and there are new people that do want to farm, believe it or not. So it's a good investment from that standpoint. We get the benefit of preserving open space, protecting watersheds. Our biggest aquifer in the town of Warwick runs directly under 5 of our preserve farms. So that aquifer will never have housing subdivisions built on it where they're drilling 50, 60, 100 wells, drawing down that aquifer, right? And also does provide some habitat for wildlife, which we squeeze out, every day that we do a subdivision. Did it protect our values in Warwick? Absolutely. Warwick's values rose 45% higher than anywhere else in Orange County. So one argument that you may hear as the discussion of a community preservation real estate tax happens is it will diminish sales. It'll stop people from buying houses. It'll reduce your values. Not true. And there's nobody that can produce any evidence that that's in fact true. In reality, you can produce a lot of evidence as to why that is exactly not true. And Warwick is a prime case, and I have data from other communities where this exists. So here's just the upshot of it all. So in 08, you can see the difference. The second number is the Orange County median price. The first numbers are Warwick's median price. Again, 40 working farms is up to 44 now, 5,000 acres. And 100% of our new subdivisions since 2002 were cluster subdivisions. So what does that mean? It means we gained 60% open space on these parcels that were developed at no cost to the town. And a lot of them are being hayed or being leased to other farmers that are adjacent to some of the subdivisions. So again, it's a cluster subdivision. If you don't have it in your zoning, or if you don't really encourage it in your zoning, I behoove you to try to do that. For the municipality, it's less roads, less infrastructure, right? It's just a fact. I mean, I used to sit down and try to figure out how I was going to pave all the roads I needed to pave with the money I had left. And it's it's why I'm gray now. It's not a fun exercise, right? So if you can shorten those roads a little bit, make them a little narrower, let's try to do that. And a vibrant farm economy really does lead to a vibrant town. We grew up with a lot of great farms in the Hudson Valley, and it's really identified with our valley and our ruralness. And I think it behooves us to try to preserve as much of it as we can. These are all citations. I think Melinda will make them all available. These are in the sections of the Warwick Town Code, which you can get on General Code's website to see the specifics of each of these things that I talked to you about tonight. A lot more of the nuts and bolts than I was able to go through. And we'll get it to everybody that's on the call if we can see. And this is my contact information. I'm willing to talk to any municipal board that's interested in hearing about some of these things in depth or being encouraged to try to follow some of them. And there's my email and my phone number, and I think I put it in the chat as well. So that's the end of my presentation, Melinda. So I'm going to stop sharing and go back to you, and we can take questions or comments or.